What's up everybody, this is Ven, and I welcome you to the M.O.C Spotlight, where we take apart what you build. For today's episode, we'll be going over DarkBeing, the centaur, created and posted on the message boards by NightofTheeAbyss. Now before we get started, let me tell you about my method of reviewing, which involves a point system that is based on 3 fundamental attributes: the overall appearance of the M.O.C, the build of the M.O.C itself, and the concept and ideas behind the M.O.C's creation. Each quality will mount up to 5 points, leading up to a final score that will be determined at the end of the episode. And please remember, this is all based on my opinion, so feel free to disagree. Now let's get this started. Hey look, it's another creation that reminds me of the Iron Giant. This is quite the tall looking robot, but I think that's all due in part to the torso, which seems very long. Maybe a bit too long, but I'll get back to that in just a second. I want to note a couple of neat features on this M.O.C, such as these awesome shoulder pads, the decently spread color scheme, the spiky aesthetic that's only in like 2 areas, and probably would have looked cooler if it was in more areas of the M.O.C. This unique yet still fairly generic look for a head, this rock hard 6-pack he has going on here, this large and cleverly constructed sword, and this big shield gun thingy that's attached to his other arm. All that stuff makes this large, intimidating robot-looking humanoid figure look prepped up for battle. Well, wait a minute. You heard me. Humanoid. And yet you might be thinking, hey, hold on there, this M.O.C is called a centaur. It's called DarkBeing the centaur. It doesn't look like a centaur, you just said it was humanoid and it clearly looks humanoid. Well, boom. Here it is in its alternate centaur form, which looks a bit awkward and disturbingly unnatural. Looks like the big dude just kind of farted out half a horse's body. That's better. Now the horse body itself is pretty decent looking. Definitely like the design of the legs, and there's some details included in here that are pretty neat, like this black brain piece being used to add some detail on the spine. But it doesn't really flow that well when it connects to the rest of the humanoid body. Again, it really does just look like this big humanoid figure got 2 extra legs attached to his butt, and it just looks straight up awkward. The body just isn't flowing together well enough to make this look good. And while we're on the topic of the body, I did mention earlier that the torso of the humanoid figure is quite elongated, and it's worth noting because it isn't the only awkward proportion that this figure has. You have these bulky arms that look nice and all, but they seem a bit too short. And then the legs also look nice aesthetically, but the thigh portions are also too short, and as a result we get kind of an awkward looking silhouette. But aesthetically it still looks pretty okay. We have a kind of smooth texture that flows throughout the M.O.C and these evenly spread out colors. The horse body doesn't look too half bad either, but it does have some more rough textures to it than the rest of the humanoid figure, but it's not that bad. While I understand that they are supposed to be hooves, and hooves aren't exactly the biggest things on a horse or a centaur's body, they should at least be a little bit bigger to kind of flow with the leg design being so bulky. In fact, a centaur's legs shouldn't really be this bulky compared to the rest of the body anyway. If you've seen traditional interpretations, usually the legs, much like a horse, are very thin, and then there's the hooves, just kind of doing their thing and sticking out there. And then we look back at this centaur creation, it just doesn't exactly look right. However, as far as the build goes, this M.O.C is incredibly solid. With a M.O.C this tall, these legs are the perfect amount of bulk to keep it standing upright, especially in centaur mode, where the back legs are especially bigger. And we can also see that there's a decent amount of articulation. We have the bendable elbows, the bendable knees, the bendable everything. The fingers are articulated. This custom built head can even move around. I mean, this makes for a really well constructed action figure. And it is worth noting that it does have the function of transforming. Well, it's not really a built-in transformation like a Transformer M.O.C or something. It is quite literally you attach the horse body to the back of this humanoid figure, as I suggested earlier. That's actually how it's put together, and then this horse body is then detached to return the M.O.C into its humanoid form. I mean, hey, that's a neat idea, I guess, but what do you do with the horse body when it's not attached? It's just kind of lying around there, being useless. We call this kibble, and it's not exactly nice to have a bunch of kibble lying around a figure. I also gotta say that the sword and gun shield look really nicely put together, and they make a great addition to the creation. I think they definitely add to its character. Overall, this creation is pretty well thought out when it came to the build. I mean, there's friction joints where there are necessary, and there's these pistons in the legs to help it maintain stability. And I'd also say that this is a pretty cool usage of parts. I really like those Fenrac heads being used as the shoulder pads, and everything that was used to put together the head and the arms especially. Even the abs were a pretty clever construction. There's a lot of good ideas being thrown into the creation, and I can really appreciate that. What's the big idea behind this mock? Well, the dude wanted to make a half-human, half-beast. Well, not initially. NightofTheeAbyss did state in his post that he was just so pleased with his initial humanoid build that he thought it would look pretty cool if he added 2 extra legs to it and made it a centaur. So that's where the whole transformation functionality comes in. He really did just kind of tack it on, and unfortunately it does show. But it is a neat idea. I definitely don't see too many centaur creations all too often. And this is a pretty unique looking one, I'll give it that. And I do enjoy this whole darkness theme that he has going on for the creation, but I think it could have been exhibited a bit more. Like I mentioned earlier, that the dude could probably use a little bit more spikiness. Now I'm thinking maybe a different head could have been neat. Like a more customized head that's intended to look a lot more menacing. I mean, heck, apparently this thing is supposed to be a human. The builder states in his post that it's supposed to be a human that transforms into a beast, or centaur. And with that said, I think I'm justified in calling out the awkward proportions if it is supposed to be human. But I guess with the mock as is, I do kind of get a Dark Knight vibe. And I don't mean Batman, but I mean some sort of knight carrying around his sword and shield working for some sort of dark overlord. And that's pretty cool looking as is. But even with that in mind, I kind of still wish this mock had a bit more of that character implemented into it. It does look pretty well put together and kind of smooth aesthetically, but I still feel as though there are plenty of more features that could have been added to it to give it a bit more character and personality and such and such. And the centaur mode isn't enough. I mean, it just kind of doesn't add all that much. And so with all that said, let's move on to the final scores and get this wrapped up, shall we? In terms of appearance, this mock receives a 3.5 out of 5. It's definitely not a bad looking mock, but it does have its quirks, such as the odd proportions and the awkward looking centaur mode. And while aesthetically it does look pretty good, it still comes off as a little bit bland, but I think the centaur warrior thing kind of makes up for that, even if it does look a little bit odd. And as far as the build goes, I'm gonna have to give it a 4.5 out of 5. In both forms, this creation has a really good build. It looks really well structured and decently solidified. I mean, this creation holds up really well as a figure, but I can't help but think that this transformation feature is just a little bit bootleg. I mean, it would have been neat if the transformation was actually implemented into the build of the actual mock itself. But instead, it's just these horse legs that are tacked onto the mock whenever you feel like having them tacked on. Or if you don't feel like having them on, then they just kind of lie around being useless. And I think that's a negative, objectively. But I will say though, at least it works, as well as it does. And finally, as far as the concept goes, I'm gonna have to give it a 4 out of 5. The builder executed his ideas fairly well. But of course, I do feel as though some things could have been done a bit better, such as the integration of the transformation from humanoid to centaur, the overall humanoid appearance, and the centaur mode doesn't exactly look the best either. But for the most part, you did pretty great. And with that, we are left with our final score, which is put together to be a 12 out of 15. You did pretty good, NightofTheeAbyss. I enjoy this mock and your ideas behind it, and I do hope to see more out of you and the rest of our community over at board.ttvpodcast.com. If you haven't joined in or posted a LEGO creation on there before, go do it. Take pictures of your creation, post it under the LEGO Creations category, and wait to see if I find it to be interesting enough to feature on the mock spotlight. And so until then, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.